be more timely. We're approaching just 2 years of coming out of one of the most challenging moments that we've ever had in our nation's history with COVID-19, and small businesses have been so incredibly resilient. And while we've seen so many amazing small businesses get started during the pandemic, come out of the pandemic, we also know that there's still challenges for many small businesses in our country. And so today's discussion is really an amazing discussion with the best set of leaders of organizations across the country. Before we hop in, I just want to say a thank you to the Small Business Roundtable membership. You'll see their logos up on the screen. We have the largest membership of national trade associations representing small businesses all around the country. Our economic power, our advocacy power together is strong. And so it's amazing to have a select set of our membership here today to begin this discussion. With that, I want to go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping. We do want this to be a conversation as much as possible. If you have questions, we are going to enable the Q&A function. One of the things that we like to remind folks, we know we have a lot of small business owners joining us today. We ask that you please don't share any personal information in the Q&A function. So with that, let's get started. It's my pleasure to first thank our sponsor, Visa. This is one of a series of events that we're going to be doing today, so please be on the lookout. Anyone who's registered today will get future information about future events. So thanks to the Visa team for making today possible. And now let me introduce our amazing lineup of conversationists. First, we'll have Ron Busby, who's the president and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc. We'll also be hearing from Ramiro Cavazos, who leads the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Shiling Tong, who's the president and CEO of the National Asian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Entrepreneurship, and then also Matt Story, who leads marketing, partnerships, and advocacy at Visa. But to facilitate this amazing conversation, it is my pleasure to turn this webinar over to a colleague and friend, the amazing Candace Waterman, who's the president and CEO of Women Impacting Public Policy. She's out there every day fighting for women business owners and women entrepreneurs. And today is a very special day, so I will let her tell you what today is and bring greetings to you all as we launch into the conversation. With that, Candace, it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to you.
Thank you so much, Rhett. And hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you are joining us from. I would like to say happy Women's History Month, and for today, happy International Women's Day. Today is the day that we recognize, honor, and acknowledge all of the amazing contributions that women have provided to our country all over the world. So happy International Women's Day. I want to say thank you to Visa for having us today for this really important conversation. You know, as we know, the pandemic has really unleashed an historic burst in entrepreneurship and self-employment, with more than 9.8 million new business applications filed in the past 2 years, according to the Census Bureau data. Yet the communities of color continue to experience barriers to opportunities and other areas that create them or preclude them from sustaining their companies, you know, really causing lots of gaps from an access to capital perspective, federal contracting perspective. And indeed, in May of 2021, Reimagine Main Street did a survey of small businesses and found that 43% of Black respondents, 38% of Asian American and Pacific Islander respondents, and 29% of Hispanic respondents were confident that they could have access, could not access the capital and financing that they needed to meet their needs. And so as we recover from COVID-19 and as the recovery takes shape, you know, I'm really excited to join us in this conversation, which is going to allow us to reflect on the state of the union for entrepreneurs of color, both challenges and opportunities. And so with this, I would love to invite my colleagues to the virtual stage, if you will, Mr. Ron Busby, Mr. Ramiro Cavazos, Mr. Matt Story, and Ms. Shiling Tong. If you all could please join us on the virtual stage. It is so good to see all of you. I am so excited that I have the distinct honor and pleasure to work alongside of all of you amazing leaders. As we talked earlier, you will get to know them throughout this conversation, and certainly I will be able to tell you highlights from each of them. If I were to read their bios, we would probably be here for about 2 hours because they are extremely accomplished individuals, and more than accomplished, they have a tenacity for advocacy for people of color and entrepreneurs for color across the country. And so with that, I would like to again say welcome to you all. And I want to jump right into the conversation. And this question is for each of you across the board because you're going to be able to answer this from the seat that you sit in, if you will. And so I'd like to ask, what unique challenges did the pandemic pose for AAPI, Black and Hispanic entrepreneurs, and how do you think they have weathered through them? Chaling, I'm going to begin with you, and happy International Women's Day to you, my colleague.
Thank you, Candice. Thank you so much. We're just so grateful we'll be able to participate this discussion. Especially thank you, Visa and Small Business Roundtable, and my dear friend Red and Ron and Romero. It's such a great challenge for all of us. I just want to share a little bit about National ACE, National Asian Pacific Islander American Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship, represent the interests of 2 million AAPI small business owners and entrepreneurs. And we have been working closely with our 100 affiliate AAPI chambers and partner organizations throughout the country to bring much needed resources to AAPI small businesses. As you have mentioned, we are very honored to participate in that survey with the U.S. Black Chamber, U.S. Hispanic Chamber, and Reimagine Main Street. And for AAPI community, 84% of business owners reported that COVID-19 has had a very negative impact on their business, particular access to capital, access to contracting opportunity, access to technology, which, we know this for years, for decades, but it's still great challenging for them. And right now, supply chain is a big issue. A lot of AAPI small business, they got all their stuck at the port, and we have to work with the local port authority to make sure to release their items. And also a very critical thing for AAPI business owner is we have experienced anti-AAPI hate. Since 2021, there's over 340% increase of anti-AAPI hate because people feel Asian, they bring a virus to this country. So we find that 1 in 3 female AAPI business owners experience direct racial bias and discrimination. And all the incidents, probably 30% happen at the business places. So we would like to elaborate more later during the conversation how we counter all these problems and challenges.
Chaling, thank you so much. I want to first start by saying we all stand in solidarity with you against these hate crimes and all of the hate that is going on. I think we have to be in a place where we are celebrated, not just tolerated. And so we do stand in solidarity with you with that. Ron, I'm going to come over to you from a Black Chamber perspective, because you are the voice in the country for Black businesses, having been a business owner yourself, having grown the U.S. Black Chambers to the powerhouse that it is with chambers across the country. Can you tell us a little bit about the chambers for those who don't know you, and certainly reiterate to us and let us know some of the challenges that you've seen your members experience during COVID?
Well, thank you, Candice. Thank you to the panel, as well as Visa and Reimagine Main Street. And on this day, International Women's Day, This is a really important day for the U.S. Black Chamber, as we know that the fastest growing segment of business owners are Black women. And when you look at the population of Black business owners, Black women represent a large percentage of that, and they are facing challenges that are unique to them. The U.S. Black Chamber represents, as you stated, 152 chambers across the country in 42 states, as well as 6 countries in Africa, plus Canada. We have a representation of over 380,000 Black-owned businesses, and we're founded on what we call our 5 key pillars. The first one being advocacy, thus the reason that we're here in Washington, D.C. And I tell this story all the time that when I first moved here, if you look at the back of our license plates, it literally reads taxation without representation. And for Black business owners, that's who we've been. We've been paying into a system that really has not represented our best interests. Thus, the U.S. Black Chamber was founded to make sure that our voices, as well as our concerns, are being heard, as well as addressed. Our second is what we're going to talk a lot about this afternoon, and that is access to capital. If you ask any small business owner their top concern, they will say access to capital. But when you talk to Black business owners, they will say their top 3 concerns are available capital and affordable capital. We know that historically we have been rated twice the interest rates. We pay twice the interest rates of our white peers and other corporations. And so we've got to make sure that when we're looking at opportunities, that there is funding there to make sure that the opportunity meets the challenge. Third one is really around contracting opportunities. And it's really great to have this panel because historically, when the federal government or corporations are looking to address our communities, it's under the broad brush of minority programs. And each one of us represents a unique community with unique needs. And so to have this conversation and to ask us each of our needs, it doesn't happen very often. Typically, if it's a business conversation about minorities, it's usually the white women that have benefited the most. Not taking anything away from them, but we saw that the President of the United States went to Tulsa last year and really laid out what the federal government has spent historically with Black firms, and we heard the number of 1.67%, which is extremely low, but the opportunity is there for our communities to double that, which may come to somewhere around a $20 billion opportunity. So we've got to be intentional. Our third one is really around, our fourth one, is really around entrepreneurial training. And the conversation and question that you asked us, what was the impact that Black business owners faced during the pandemic? We lost 41% of our businesses. That represents 441,000 businesses closed between the months of February and April. That's the bad news. The good news is that we as a business community are resilient. Of that 441,000, 70% of them tried to open a second time. 32% tried to open a third time, and 18% of those businesses that closed tried to open 4 different times. That is extremely important because as we talk about solutions, we've got to also include those businesses that are restarting or starting for the first time. And so when we talk to our businesses about why they closed, 70% said the reason that they closed because of lack of information. And so our chamber provides 18 webinars, informational seminars every month to make sure that our businesses have what they need. And lastly, it's around chamber development. And so, like the other chamber presidents here, we're here to make sure that our communities have the resources and the acumen that they need so that our communities and business owners have the acumen and the resources that they need. The great news, though, is that we've seen a 34% increase of new Black businesses start up since the pandemic hit, which means that we've had a good news story in reference to businesses starting up. The bad news is that many of those had jobs and are forced now to become an entrepreneur. But we see that as an opportunity for us to grow our communities because we know that the fastest way to create wealth is through business ownership. So we're looking forward to having the conversation and dialogue the rest of this afternoon.
Absolutely. You hit on so many things. You know, this is the year of resiliency for us. And I think that it is the true definition and testament to all of the diverse businesses across the country who have, to your point, started 2, 3, 4 times, and also a testament to the fact that we need to meet them where they are, not just provide some solutions, but make certain that those solutions are thoughtful. And as I think about thoughtful solutions and certainly being a huge voice, both in entrepreneurship and on the Hill, the way that WIP is, Ramiro, I have to come over to you. Again, as you are the voice for the Hispanic community across the country. And as with Ron, having chambers across the country, being the boots on the ground, and we know that you have had your own fair share of challenges, but also successes from an entrepreneurship perspective with your firms that you represent. And so can you talk to us a little bit first about who the U.S. Hispanic Chamber is, for those who don't know, and then certainly share some of your insights on challenges and some successes.
Well, thank you so much, Candace. Thank you for the powerful work you do for our women entrepreneurs. Thank you for moderating this panel. I would imagine that Chiling, Ron, and I, we're very grateful to you for bringing us together to have this dialogue, and to Visa for sponsoring today, along with Matt and Megan, and of course the Business Roundtable. I want to do my thank yous up front because it's important to have gratitude for this conversation today that is so important. If you look at the state of the Latino community, we are at roughly 60 million in this country. Our country has roughly 320 million people living in it. If you look at 2040, this country will have 400 million people living in it. Latino community from 60 million will go to 100 million. What does that say? That 80 million increase to 400 million in the US, 50% of it, 40 million, will come from the Latino community. Also want to say facts are and the data proves out that the Latino community, as you all know, we are Afro-Latino, we're Asian Latinos, LGBTQ Latinos, Native American Latinos. We love everyone in our culture, and we are also natural entrepreneurs. Our DNA has shown what Ron and Chiling has said, that we are resilient, and we've had to be, because even though our credit scores may be higher, and even though we may have a better history of paying back loans through non-traditional sources, 60 to 70% of Latino-owned businesses are turned down at a traditional bank when they apply for capital. As Ron said, that is the number one need for our businesses. You also throw in capacity building. Our businesses, many of them are new entrepreneurs. They're younger entrepreneurs. The average age of Latinos in America, our median age is 30. The non-Latino median age is 50. So it's a very young community, fast growing. 80% of the 60 plus million born here in the US, but that's not the narrative that's out there in America. We are unfortunately largely invisible in the media, in corporate suites, in procurement. The largest buying service in the world is the US government. We pay more than our fair share of taxes as Hispanic, Black, and Asian Americans. Also want to say that one thing that our businesses have seen and learned is that we're all interconnected more than we thought we were before COVID, but we were already suffering a different version of a pandemic, and it was exclusion, and it was racism, and it was segregation. And so for us, this conversation, I'm honored to work for a national Latino business organization that represents 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses, 260 plus Hispanic chambers. And of course, we work with the private sector and the public sector to make sure that in addition to capital, in addition to capacity building, that we also work on connections, contracting, procurement. What our members always tell us, Candace, is we need more business. We don't need more smoke and mirrors. So we want our fair share of the economic pie. This country was built by those of us on this panel. If you go back to 400, 500 years plus, and we continue to build this country today, our entrepreneurial levels are higher than average, and but we're coming from further back, Candace, when we create economic empowerment and create wealth in our communities. So this is an economic imperative. We cannot ignore any longer our Asian, Black, or brown communities, Hispanic communities, because we as a nation today, the largest economy in the world, built by us, will no longer fill those gaps if we don't make sure that a rising tide lifts all boats. So this is an important discussion for us. We like to talk about the 3 C's: capital, capacity building, and contracting, and we'll continue to fight hard with our colleagues to create that solidarity. Thanks to Candace, the work that we do with you and many others to make sure that we create wealth in our community and improve our quality of life. We all need to do that, and we are embracing this opportunity as we build back the economy to make sure that we say goodbye to the pandemic, but we learn important lessons that we're all interconnected, we're resilient, and we're ready and hungry.
Absolutely. You know, I love when yourself and Justin, who's not with us today, talks about the pie, right? The pie doesn't need to get smaller. We just need to all be at the table, and it will automatically make the pie larger. Thus, us ensuring that we are committed to the success of all Black and brown people across the country. I know one person who is highly committed to entrepreneurship and diversity is Mr. Matt Story here that is with us today, and Visa. And I have to say, I know that this conversation is very special to you, Matt, from a couple of places. One, because your beautiful wife is an entrepreneur, and you have 2 girls, so you're a girl dad. So International Women's Day hits you a little bit differently, but certainly this conversation around entrepreneurship does. And so you've heard some of the stories from us about the barriers. And so I'd like to ask you, from the seat that you're able to sit in and impact, and the work that you're able to do at Visa, how does that shape that work? Meaning the barriers and trying to level the playing field, or help us level the playing field, particularly from a capital perspective.
Yeah, well, first I just want to say thank you, Candace, for moderating this conversation, because as you mentioned, it's one that's very important, and it's also one that's very near and dear to not only what I do in the day job, but also in my life. I 100% agree with everything that's been said about not only the importance of entrepreneurship within these communities, but also what we can do to interconnect and to lift up together, because that's truly where the potential comes from. So thank you to the other panelists for allowing me just to learn and to hear from their own experiences, and to hear what they're working on, and look forward to continuing the conversations even beyond the short amount of time we have today. But particularly as I think about, what are the opportunities to provide help, because I think that's what we're all here to talk about. One of the things that we've been really focused in on is there's not one size fits all solution. There's not one thing that we can just go do that's going to help every single person. And ultimately, what we're focused on is uplifting everyone everywhere. But that doesn't mean that we do one thing and that works. And so what we've really been keying in on is trying to listen and understand, what are those obstacles, what are those challenges, and they stem from the same event, being the pandemic, but there's multiple layers to it that impact many of the communities in so many different ways. And so, as we all saw in our personal lives, our behaviors changed overnight. We weren't able to do the things that we would normally do and interact with all the great businesses that we would normally locally support. And because of that, our business owners and entrepreneurs had to adapt, and they had to modify how they actually supported their business and their livelihood. And some were not prepared for that, and some were not able to quickly move into this new way. And so behavior from a customer standpoint changed overnight, but it's nearly impossible for our business owners and entrepreneurs to make that change so quickly and so seamlessly. And so it's great to hear about all the different things that all the various panelists have started to focus on and implemented to help those business owners get to that adaptation. But from my seat, what we really see is that it focuses in on all the things that have been touched on: access to capital, Because a lot of times, if you're going to adapt your business model, it requires investment, it requires funding to be able to adjust and to adapt to those new ways of working and those new ways of interacting with your customers. We saw, particularly around digital payments, many businesses had to go online overnight. And many people weren't prepared to make that shift. And so whatever we could do to not only help you connect with your local community, but also to set up an online presence because your neighborhood got bigger. If you were selling something that others across the world or across the country, across the state, across the city were interested in, you had the opportunity to provide your services on a much larger platform because all of us got really comfortable with ordering from our couches. And what we wanted to do is understand how we could really help with that and help understand helping people get to the point of understanding how to bring those digital payments forward. So we, in 2020, made a commitment that we wanted to help 50 million small businesses and micro businesses become digitally enabled. And that looks different for all businesses. That's not the same, again, same solution for everyone. And we're happy to say that as of September, we reached 16 million of that 50. And again, still a lot of work to do and still a lot more that we have underway. But I think the thing that we're really focusing in on is how do we meet people where they are? And then the last thing I'll say is also recognizing that a lot of these businesses, it's really community-based. So finding ways that we can connect with those local communities. And for us, we've had to do that through partnership because as a large corporation, we don't know each individual local community and can't get hands-on and feet on the ground in each local community. But through partnership, we can do that and we can reach a lot of these entrepreneurs and business owners to really provide, whether it's access to capital, whether it's resources, it's infrastructure, it's access to mentors, and many other things, which I know we'll talk about in this discussion.
Well, I want to say thank you. I'm going to start with where you left off, and that was around the community, because the community is really the ecosystem for these businesses, right? And having a solid one. And to your point, your reliance on us, right? Us all individually here as leaders that are your segue or pathway to these communities where we can get the help out there, I think is what's needed. It certainly is going to take all of us. Again, the shotgun approach no longer works. We're talking laser focus. What do we need? How do we need it? When do we need it? Right? And then having our entrepreneurs understand why they need it, because sometimes it's a gap in what we see that they need and what they think that they need. So I think, to your point, us working together as the solution from an ecosystem perspective is going to really help the success of our firms. Chilling, I'm going to come over to you. You know, I know that AAPIs represent the fastest growing ethnic group right now in the United States. And so what role does entrepreneurship play in the AAPI community? And then what economic impact do AAPI small business owners have as we have that discussion?
Candice, thank you so much. This is such a meaningful discussion. Especially, I really appreciate you talking about 2022 is the year of resilience. I love that word. And also, Matt, thank you so much for Visa's commitment to small business, especially for diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is so important to us, I'm sure for Ron and Romero too. Entrepreneurship plays a very, very strong role within the AAPI community. As many of you know, AAPIs are present in all major US sectors, from restaurants and convenience stores to Silicon Valley startups. For many AAPIs, entrepreneurship is in the family, in their heart. And many AAPI businesses are owned and operated by families and passed down from one generation to the next. The economic impact from AAPI entrepreneurs is insignificant. We own roughly 9% of all US-based business, 1 out of 10 of small businesses, employ more than 5 million people and contribute towards about $900 billion to the US economy each year. As we haven't mentioned about, we still have a challenge we have to face. And for example, like although anti-AAPI hate is no longer a headline, but this incident continue to rise. We were in February to celebrate our Lunar New Year, and just like last week, Nevada's governor, Nevada Governor Sisolak came to our event with his wife. And just last week, a couple of days ago, they were harassed on the street. Governor of Nevada and his wife, because he married to a Chinese American wife. So it's no longer the headline, but the incident and also harassment is still there. So AAPI community is not a monolith. It is a large and culturally diverse and represent over 50 ethnic groups that speak 100 languages. So if you can imagine, for any federal, state, and local resources, it's very difficult to translate into different languages. So that's why we have conduct AAPI strong roundtable discussion throughout the country. Personally, I will be traveling to 15 cities, and we will conduct the roundtable to share the federal resources, state and local resources to the small business owner, and also hear their concerns and issues, how we can bring back to Washington, D.C. So we, instead of use negative, we use positives. We use a program called AAPI Strong Program. We focus on training business to respond, in crisis situation. And also we have a technical system program to help them to access to capital, and also host our regular roundtable discussion and training with policymakers, lawmakers, corporate leader, and small business leader to discuss a way to create impactful solution.
That's great. I applaud you for having the roundtable discussions and doing this across the country so that you can remove the barriers, first from a language perspective, right? And then certainly from a capital access and the digital perspective, as Matt talked about earlier, because we know that if anything, COVID taught us our world is flat, and access to internet, right, and access to being able to do digital commerce is one that our businesses need to strive. Ramiro, I'm going to pop over to you. According to a study, or the initiative, for Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship in 2021 on the state Latino businesses, Latinos experienced 44% growth in the number of businesses over the last decade, as you talked about, compared to just 4% of non-Latinos. What impact does entrepreneurship have on the Hispanic small business community and economy as a whole?
Well, Candace, entrepreneurship is embedded in the DNA of our Hispanic community. It's a very diverse community, as I mentioned earlier, but it's a community that is embracing technology. It's embracing digital. Also, because of the culture, the ethnicity of our community, we believe that your net worth is your network. And we are and have learned during the pandemic that your public face, I said earlier, we're more interconnected than we ever imagined, is your website, is your social media. And our community, because it's younger, is really capturing the essence of this new economy that is driven by technology and social media, and also instantaneous momentum when it comes to entrepreneurship. And so while many of our businesses are still needing capacity, still needing capital, still needing contracts, which are all things that will continue to be drivers for all of our constituencies, what we have seen during the pandemic is that our community is optimistic about the future. Ron had said this earlier, and so did Chiling. This is a community, our communities have been beaten down for years for no reason. And so you throw a pandemic in our way, we're going to stop, as we say in Texas, we're going to Bigfoot our way into the future using technology and also partnering with each other. I'm happy to report that because we are more interconnected than we ever imagined before, even businesses, non-African American, non-Asian, and non-Latino businesses understand that if someone, because of the pandemic, is running about 2 or 3 months late on their lease payment, that business owner holds a note at a bank, and they know that these entrepreneurs who may be struggling with the economy right now, that they need that business to stay in their building if they own that building. And so for me, I think we all learn to reach out, to listen, to partner, and to be creative in this environment. And our businesses are proving, because of the Latino Business Action Network and the data that is coming from these surveys that we're doing, that this is a community that is optimistic, it's hungry, and it is not afraid of the future. If anything, they know the stakes are so high because they've seen it all. They've seen 9/11 as youngsters. They've seen now, of course, the unfortunate conflict in Europe, and they've also seen a pandemic that has never been seen before, and the Great Recession of just 12 years ago. So, this is nothing new, but that's the environment we're living in today. And this community is fighting and is hungry, and it's a community that is embracing the future, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue, right, into the question that I want to pose to Ron from an entrepreneur perspective for Black entrepreneurs, right? To your point in your opening remarks, you already said have tried 2, 3, 4 times. So that proves that they're having resiliency or exhibiting resiliency during the COVID-19 pandemic. And also represent one of the fastest growing demographics of entrepreneurs in the US. And according to a recent study that the Kauffman Foundation did, they found that there were more new Black-owned businesses proportionate to the total population in 2020 than any other time, in particular in the last quarter century. So I would ask you, Ron, what opportunities does entrepreneurship provide for the Black entrepreneurs and that impact to our U.S. economy?
Great question. And I think what we have missed in this conversation thus far is the murder of George Floyd. So while we were in the midst of a pandemic, of a virus that had borderline devastation to not just this country, but across the world. So during that, you also had the murder of George Floyd, which had a huge impact on our community. One of the things that we saw in that was the commitments made by both the federal government as well as corporations to invest and to spend with Black-owned firms. Those commitments were heard and documented to the tune of somewhere around $6.5 billion. What we've actually been able to track thus far is somewhere around $500,000 of actual spend. And part of the challenge there is, again, the certification process. Historically, Black-owned businesses, as I stated before, were painted as minority firms, so it was very difficult for us to track the actual impact of Black firms. Now that we have the Buy Black certification, which is owned and operated by the U.S. Black Chamber, we now can document which firms are 51% owned by African Americans or Black people. You'll find that 1 in 11 Black people are entrepreneurs. That is a new energy across the globe. We understand that entrepreneurship is the quickest way to be able to create wealth. But we've got to ask for 3 things, and we're talking to this administration as well as state and local governments across the country. The first one is intentionality. And you'll hear all of us talk about what are you doing specifically for our communities versus a broad brush approach. The second one has got to be transparency. We've heard $6 billion, but where is it really going and what are the real numbers? And third, accountability. It makes no sense to put out a commitment, to put out a joint statement of what you're going to do, and when it not happens, there's no accountability. So for our communities, we're looking for those, but we see entrepreneurship as the wave of the future for our communities. You hear so about the Black community having $1 trillion of spend power, but that's usually not Black people having that conversation. That's usually corporate America saying that Black consumers have $1 trillion of spend power. How can we market to them to get their share? We've got to change that conversation to say, we have $1 trillion. How can we keep as much of that in our community to ensure that we have prosperity and long-term sustainability? The number one concern in the Black community today is unemployment. There's roughly 2 million unemployed Black people this morning. That's the bad news. The good news is there's close to 2 million Black-owned businesses. Simple math says that if each one of those businesses could hire one of those unemployed Black people in this country, we don't have an unemployment conversation for Black America. And that could be done internally with some good policy as well as good relationships. And so that's where the U.S. Black Chamber sees that number as being a positive and a confirmation of our future.
Ron, you hit on so many things. Certainly the three topics that you stated, or the three pillars around intentionality, transparency, and accountability, I think actually is the foundation and enabler, right, for everything else, as you talked about, because as we know, you cannot have a conversation about access to capital if you don't have a conversation about access to contracts, right? Access to capital is a bridge. Access to contracts provides us true sustainability for our businesses.
But can I jump in there? Because
you sure can.
One of the challenges that business owners that are listening are going to face, especially doing business with the federal government, and we as chamber leaders know this story too well. You could get a contract January 1st with the federal government and not get paid till July 15th. That's something that definitely needs to be addressed. I don't want people to think, oh, we have this infrastructure bill coming down. There's going to be billions of dollars, trillions of dollars to be contracts awarded. If you don't have a good banking relationship prior to getting that contract, you could be setting yourself up for failure. So as much as we talk about contracts, we've got to start with talking about access to capital.
Oh, absolutely. And not just that, you talk about the financial literacy, and I don't mean that in an offensive manner, but in a very matter-of-fact manner, because if there are funds available, you need to know how to spend it appropriately so that you can increase your cash flow and keep it so that you don't have to keep coming back getting it, but so that it works for you. And also to your point, looking at the cost of a contract. If the contract, $1 million contract, costs you $999,000, is that really worth the contract, right, or more? And so that is a good way for me to come over to you, Matt, to talk about innovative methods, right, from access to capital perspective, and how has Visa deployed some of these innovative methods to reach minority entrepreneurs and expand resources and training, right, from the financial perspective.
Yeah, and I'm going to start with a story that's a bit more personal. I've seen through my wife's business firsthand that it's not just about access to capital. It's not just about the knowledge. It's not just about the systems. Like, they all work together. So as she goes to manufacture a new product, because of the lack of access to capital, she's not able to do it in the way that she's being advised to do it, such that she's having to come up with workarounds that are ultimately going to cost more than it would have cost in the first round. And so these things are also intertwined in a way that it's not simply like release the money, or it's not simply like give them the mentoring, or it's not simply expose them to the processes or what have you. It's like it's all interconnected. And I think Candace, the point you made of, and when's the right time? Because as you progress your business, getting it to the next level, you can't do what got you to that level. You're going to need new skills, new capabilities, new resources, and new networks to tap into. And so I think for Visa, what we want to be is that network into, no matter where you are in the system, we can connect you to where you want to be and help people see that way to that next stage, the next phase of their business. One of the things we've done in partnership with Black Girl Ventures is really focusing in on Black women entrepreneurs and small business owners and recognizing there's a high concentration of them in a number of metropolitan areas. We picked 6 cities that have over-indexed with minority-owned businesses. So Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, Miami, and Washington, D.C. And what we're doing is, and we're actually in the middle of this, is we've rolled out over $1 million in grants that we're giving out, but we're not just giving the grants, we're also giving mentorship from other business owners. And so expanding their network of who can help me understand that once I get the capital in, how do I allocate that in a way that's going to help me get to that next phase and be a solution? And then also give them access to things that we as Visa have, like practical business skills that can really help them think about how do they approach the business side of their business as well as they're growing. Because as all entrepreneurs and business owners know, what you know today isn't what's going to get you to tomorrow. And so having those bridges of resources, tools, and network is really important. And so I think for me, just understanding the interconnected part of it from my personal side really shows the complexity of how we have to approach this with many solutions that can be tailored to the individual needs of all the different business owners, all the different entrepreneurs, all the different communities. And I love the fact of what everyone is sharing is that entrepreneurship is in the DNA. And that's the fuel to get to that next level. But we got to make sure the tools are available and make sure that the tools are in hand to take the fuel, take the tools, and allow them to thrive. And I think that's really where the opportunity is with conversations like this and the partnerships like this.
Absolutely. I think to say that it's in the DNA of all of the groups that we represent would be a statement that is truly unrepresented, because it is forefront for all of us. You know, each of us has talked about and touched on policy just in the conversation that we've had, right? We know that is where the true impact comes from. Even the work that Visa is doing, from having the commitment of hitting 50 million businesses, right, from a digital perspective. That means that the folks need to have access to internet, right? So we're talking about policy. In our last few moments, I want to do a round robin with each of my colleagues here and ask, what can policymakers do to close these gaps, either from the seat that you're sitting in, right, from an entrepreneur perspective? And I think all of us will share, we know it's access to capital and access to contracts, but do you have other specific items that you feel that policymakers can do to close these gaps? And I am going to start with you, Ramiro, and come over to Chilling and Ron, and then I'll have Matt give us the final words of the day.
Well, Candace, I'll be as brief as I can be. We need to have our policymakers put their money where their mouth is. We cannot talk about increasing procurement, increasing capital, increasing resources or capacity for our businesses. Our Black, Hispanic, and Asian communities represent the backbone of America's economy, and that is growing every day. And so I'm glad that the president issued a 15% executive order as a goal for the U.S. government, but that goal will not be achieved if we don't put in place a plan to execute by each Department of Defense. We got a lot of cyber firms out there that are minority owned, and they're not getting any business. I also saw in the chat, Candace, that these contracts need to be broken up. You know, they don't put Black, brown, and Asian firms as prime contractors. We are and can deliver on prime contracting, but we won't achieve that 15% goal if we keep the rules of the game the way they are right now. So with that, everyone doing buying and procurement, they shouldn't be gatekeepers either. They need to be champions for our businesses, not just in Fortune 1000 firms, but in the U.S. government. So we've got to, do what we say we're going to do and put a plan in place. Mark Twain said once, a vision without a plan is a hallucination. And so we need to make sure that we put a plan in place to execute, as Matt Story very capably described. This is really our time to deliver on our promises.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I just want to pop into the Q&A before I come over to you, Chilling, because we've had several questions, and I believe that we have responded to them. There was one that just came in about the prompt pay policies, which we know that we do have, but we have to continue to ask for, as Ron said, accountability and transparency from that prompt pay policy that is out there, and ensure that our businesses have access. The other was around sole source, particularly with some of the 8A businesses and federal contracts and having set-asides. And we know that there are many set-asides within the socioeconomic classes, if you will, and all of us continue from the seat that we sit in and the constituent base that we serve, continue to advocate for each of those categories to ensure that we do have sole source opportunities for our constituents. Shalene, I'm going to come over to you from a policy perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you, Romero. I especially appreciate your talking about the well-represented new economy. And this is so important, and also as Ron's new wave of the future. Policy means very significant for us, particularly because I talk about anti-AAPI hate. Last summer, Congress passed the COVID-19 Hate Crime Act to address alarming rise in hate. And also during President Biden's State of the Union mentioned about this bill. Personally, we have been, National ACE has been invited to the White House to meet with President Biden and also Vice President and other White House officials to address this very, very important issues. So their involvement means a lot to us because the bill created new position within the DOJ to crack down on the wave of racial bias against the AAPI community and issue guidance for state and local law enforcement to establish online reporting in multiple languages, among other actions. And also, I really appreciate Ron mentioned about the corporate commitment to the minority community and also D&I. I think a policymaker definitely can help to track down each corporation, how they focus on these important issues. They can send letters to corporation to check with them the status. It's definitely a big help for the minority business community.
Absolutely. Ron?
Wow. Romero just sent me a text saying, bring us home.
I know, I saw it.
So I have a couple of points. The first one is get back to the table. We need to have more dialogue. When I first came to Washington, D.C., I saw the commitments from both sides of the aisle to move small minority businesses forward because of the fact that they understood the value of minority communities as well as small businesses across the country. So the first thing is let's get back to having conversations that are intelligent, responsible, and mature about really moving our communities forward. Second one is the prompt pay program. I was going to talk more about that. For those of you that don't know, during the Obama administration in 2010, during the last recession, we had similar conditions. Federal contracts were being awarded, and it was taking somewhere up between 90 days and 120 days to get paid. The federal government developed and implemented a program called Prompt Pay, which allowed you to invoice the last day of your processing. Let's say it was you invoiced January 1st, you would get paid by January 15th. Now, removing the barrier of you having to go out and find the capital from a bank or another investment firm. I think that is good policy. I think for us, it really is about transparency. I'm excited that the U.S. Black Chamber was awarded the SBA's Navigator program. I believe that there are great programs that already exist in both the federal government and the SBA, but they never hit our communities. The information gap between what happens in Washington, D.C. as it relates to what happens on Main Street is far and removed. And so it's based upon us. I know the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, National Urban League, and 3 other national organizations have been awarded this $5 million grant to make sure that our communities understand what is going on in Washington, D.C. as reference to best practices. And then lastly, for our community, we really want to talk about reparations. It's a conversation that many of us in the Black community have all whispered about, have all had home conversations, but very seldom will we bring that to the administration, to the White House. We saw that under the COVID virus, a commitment from the federal government of $349 billion without ever asking the question about the impact of those businesses that were awarded that first $250 billion. We say, as a Black community, we have suffered more than 400 years and really want to have a conversation about reparations. It's not about getting checks, but it really is about getting contracts, opportunity to grow our communities internally. And when that happens, we truly will see a great America. Over the last 5.5 years, we've heard a lot about making America great again. And I say, as a Black business community, we want America to be great as well. But in order for there to be a great America, there must be great minority America. And in order for there to be a great minority America, you need great minority businesses. And in order to have great minority businesses, you need great minority chambers. And I'm excited to be on here today with the other chamber leaders from across the country to represent our businesses, our needs, as well as the voices of our community. And so again, thank you on behalf of the U.S. Black Chamber, our board of directors, as well as our members across the country for allowing us to participate this afternoon.
Well, I want to say thank you. Thank you to Visa for having us for this courageous conversation that we have to have. We know that, as you say, all of us having a seat at the table, having a conversation about real solutions is what it really takes. And Visa, I applaud you, as I know my colleagues do, for all of the work that you are doing in diverse communities across the country. And we look forward to our continued work to support you in your efforts as you support the communities that we all represent. So thank you so much, Matt, today for sharing your personal story and for being such a champion for all of us. Thank you to each of my colleagues, to Chaling, to Ramiro, and to Ron and Rhett. I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, well, thank you, Ron, for bringing us home. I was getting some chills. I think, this is the reason Small Business Roundtable started. As a collective, we are so much more powerful together. Today's conversation was just, I love that we were real and honest and talking about real solutions. We should all take advantage of the moment that it's, 2 years, right, coming out of COVID, and the people who you see on the screen today immediately sprung into action, began to work together to make sure that small businesses were at the center of recovery, not only meeting with government leaders during the pandemic, but pushing our partners in the private sector to do and do more. And so I just want to take a moment of personal privilege to thank each of our chamber leaders and Candace for all that you've done over the past 2 years, from literally being hunkered in your house, joining Zoom calls and conference calls to make sure that our government was responding for our small business owners across the country. And it feels exciting in this moment. It feels like maybe we're coming out of the COVID haze a little bit. People are starting to move again. And I think we're all excited for what the future of our economy looks like with you all being at the leadership helm. So thank you for being here today. With that, we want to let folks know that we will make this conversation available. Again, this is the first of a series that we're excited. And of course, if you have any questions, reach out to us at team@Small Business Roundtable. Candace, thank you for your time and your amazing leadership in curating today's conversation. And with that, this is now the end of the conversation. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.